Sometimes, a single moment can shift the perspective of an entire audience, perhaps even the world. Sometimes, the most profound lessons come from the most unexpected voices. That night, everyone was expecting a heated debate, but no one could have predicted that a simple, quiet response would leave the entire room speechless. The annual Global Leadership Summit was taking place in the heart of London, inside the magnificent Westminster Conference Hall. The venue was filled with politicians, business moguls, journalists, and scholars all gathered to discuss the world's most pressing issues. Inside, debates were already heating up, covering human rights, economic disparities, and global crises. But the real anticipation was building for the event's most prestigious panel. On one side, a famous media figure known for their sharp tongue and controversial opinions. Next to them, a billionaire businessman, infamous for his unfiltered, unapologetic views on wealth and power. Both had clashed many times before, and tonight was expected to be no different. But no one paid much attention to the third speaker, sitting quietly at the edge of the stage. In between the two high-profile speakers sat a man who barely stood out. No expensive suit, no commanding posture, just a quiet presence. Dr. Elias Carter. A man who had spent decades working in conflict zones, refugee camps, and crisis negotiations. He had mediated between governments, corporations, and war-torn communities. Yet, he had never been one to seek the spotlight. And even now, as the debate was about to begin, he remained silent, simply observing. The journalist turned to the businessman, launching the first question. Do you believe the private sector holds any responsibility in addressing global inequality? The businessman scoffed. Our job is to create wealth, not hand it out. People need to take responsibility for themselves. A few murmurs rippled through the audience. The journalist smirked and pressed further. So, to you, this is just business? The struggles of millions of people mean nothing? The discussion quickly escalated. The two panelists argued, their voices rising, each determined to overpower the other. The audience sat at the edge of their seats, absorbed by the spectacle of two egos clashing. Dr. Elias Carter, however, remained silent. Finally, the journalist turned to Dr. Carter, flashing a smug smile. Dr. Carter, you've spent years working in these conditions. What do you think? Who's right? All eyes turned to him. Until now, he had barely spoken. The audience waited, curious about what this quiet observer had to say. Dr. Carter lifted his gaze, scanning the crowd, and then he said nothing. For 10 long seconds, he simply sat in silence. People exchanged confused glances. A low murmur spread across the room. Was something wrong? Did he not hear the question? Then, in a calm and steady voice, he finally spoke. You know, a 7-year-old refugee once told me something wiser than anything I've heard here tonight. The crowd fell still. Dr. Carter continued, his voice unwavering. One day, that child asked me, why do grown-ups always shout? If they want to find the truth, why don't they whisper? The silence deepened. Even the panelists who had been at each other's throats just moments ago were now listening intently. Dr. Carter took a step forward, his gaze sweeping across the audience. And that's why tonight, none of us are truly right, because we're all too busy shouting. The journalist gripped the edge of the podium, suddenly uncomfortable. The businessman shifted in his seat. Dr. Carter let the words settle before delivering his final statement. If you really want to find the truth, don't look for it in arguments. Look for it in silence. For the first time that evening, nobody had a response. Nobody had a quick retort. Dr. Carter had turned a heated debate into a moment of absolute clarity. Then, a single person started clapping. Another followed. Within seconds, the entire room was on its feet, giving a standing ovation. This wasn't the applause given to a powerful speech filled with rehearsed arguments. It was the applause of realization. That night there was no winner, because it was never about winning. And perhaps, for the first time in their lives, everyone in that room truly listened. If this story made you think, remember this. Sometimes, the loudest message is spoken in silence. For more thought-provoking stories, don't forget to subscribe.